28 years ago, a young hospice nurse in the logging country of Yamhill County, Oregon, left her hospital shift at 11:40 on a Tuesday night and vanished between the parking lot and her car, leaving behind her keys on the asphalt, her coat folded on the passenger seat through a window she had left cracked, and a 6-year-old boy at home with a babysitter who had fallen asleep on the couch, waiting for her to come through the door. Authorities at the time concluded it was a random crime by an unknown person passing through. A stranger, a transient. Someone the investigation could not reach. Nora Sell's mother refused to accept that for a single day of the 28 years that followed. She was right not to. The man who killed her daughter had a name, a face, and a life that went on in plain sight for nearly 3 decades. And the only thing that finally connected him to what he had done was a small gold locket, sealed shut for 28 years in the dark of a storm drain, protecting the one piece of evidence that was always going to be enough. But to understand what was inside that locket, and why it mattered, and why it had never been found until a road crew cleared a drain on Route 18 on a wet Tuesday morning in March of 2023, you have to go back to the beginning. Because to understand what was lost, you first have to understand who Nora Sell was. McMinnville, Oregon, sits in the Willamette Valley at the edge of the Coast Range foothills. The kind of town that had grown slowly and steadily through the 1980s, and by 1995 was large enough to have a hospital, a community college, and a main street with 3 competing diners, but still small enough that the nurses at Willamette Valley Medical Center knew the names of each other's children and whose husband worked at the mill and whose mother had bad knees. The surrounding country was logging and wine country both, the vineyards just beginning to take hold on the hillsides that faced south, the timber operations still running in the higher ridges, the air in autumn carrying pine sap and the distant smell of burn piles from the clear-cut edges. Nora Sell had grown up 40 minutes south in the town of Dallas, Oregon, the younger of 2 daughters of a retired postal worker and a woman who had spent 30 years as a school aide and who had given Nora a small gold locket on her 21st birthday with the instruction that she should put inside it whatever was most worth keeping. Nora had moved to McMinnville in 1989 to take her nursing degree and had stayed, finding work at Willamette Valley Medical Center in the oncology and palliative care wing, and discovering, as some people do, that she was specifically suited to the hardest version of the work. She was 29 years old in 1995, a hospice nurse, and she had been doing that work for 5 years. Her colleagues would describe her later in terms that are easy to dismiss as the things people say about someone who has died, but that held up in interview after interview across years, that she was not soft in the way that sentimentality is soft, but rather that she was steady in the way that certain people are steady who have decided that the world's pain is something to be met rather than managed. She kept a handwritten list, updated every shift, of the names of her current patients tucked into the breast pocket of her scrubs. She read through it on the drive home, not to review their charts, to think about each of them as people. That was the habit that her supervisor, a woman named Janet Fry, would remember for the rest of her life. Nora had a son named Marcus. He was 6 years old in October of 1995, a first grader at Patton Elementary, a boy who collected rocks with particular shapes and kept them in a shoebox under his bed, and who called his mother from his grandmother's house every day after school at precisely 3:15, because that was the agreement they had made. She was raising him alone, amicably separated from Marcus's father since 1993, with the kind of arrangement that worked well enough and that both of them considered adequate. She had an apartment on Baker Street, 2 bedrooms, a small back porch where she kept a hanging fern and a wind chime that Marcus had made for her birthday out of painted bottle caps. On the evening of October 17, 1995, Nora Sell worked a full shift in the palliative care wing, stayed 20 minutes late to complete a handoff with the incoming nurse, and was seen walking out through the hospital's east parking lot exit by a security guard named Phil Raines at approximately 11:42 p.m. He would later tell investigators that she had her bag over one shoulder and was moving with the brisk, contained energy of someone heading home after a long shift. She looked, he said, exactly like herself. She never made it to her car. Her car was a 1992 Honda Civic, silver, parked in the hospital employee lot on the east side of the building. At 7:14 the following morning, when the day shift supervisor noticed Nora had not called in sick and was not answering her phone, she sent a colleague to check the parking lot. The Civic was still there. The driver's door was unlocked. Nora's coat, a brown wool coat she wore on cold nights, was folded on the passenger seat. Her keys were on the asphalt beside the driver's side rear tire, as though they had been dropped. They had been dropped. Nora's mother, Elaine Sell, was reached by phone at 8:30 a.m. She had Marcus with her. He had slept over the night before because Nora was on a late shift, and the babysitter, a teenager named Amy Doherty, had let herself out at midnight assuming Nora was simply delayed. Elaine drove to the hospital. She walked the parking lot. She stood beside her daughter's car for a long time without touching anything. The Yamhill County Sheriff's Office was called at 9:05 a.m. Deputies arrived by 9:40. The parking lot was secured. Phil Raines was interviewed at the scene. The last documented moment of Nora Sell's life was her walking through the east exit at 11:42 p.m. on October 17, 1995. Between that moment and 7:14 the following morning, she had been taken. The keys were photographed in place. Collected, examined, no fingerprints beyond Nora's own. 12 feet from the driver's door, near the storm drain at the lot's edge, investigators found a pager. A small black pager, the kind that clipped to a belt. Unregistered, it was photographed, logged, and placed into evidence. The number displayed on its screen was a callback number that, when dialed, connected to nothing. A number that had been deactivated. Records would show, within 48 hours of Nora's disappearance. That pager would sit in an evidence bag for 28 years. By the second day, the search had expanded beyond the parking lot. By the fourth day, it had extended to the surrounding county roads and the creek drainages south of the hospital. On October 24th, 1 week after Nora was last seen, her remains were found in a field drainage ditch off Riverside Drive, 3 miles from the hospital parking lot. She had been there since shortly after she disappeared. Marcus Sell was 6 years old. He did not fully understand, and then he did. Detective Sergeant Roy Alderman of the Yamhill County Sheriff's Office led the investigation. He was 47 years old, a deliberate man who had worked rural Oregon cases for 22 years and who understood that in a county of this size the geography worked against you. Too much rural space, too few cameras, too many ways for a person to move unseen. He had 3 young investigators working under him and access to the Oregon State Police Crime Lab in Portland, which processed the scene evidence over the following 2 weeks. The pager was the first serious thread. Alderman tried to trace the callback number through every available channel. The number had been assigned to a prepaid pager account opened under a false name at a shop in Salem, 40 miles south, in August of 1995, 2 months before Nora disappeared. The account had been paid in cash. The shop's records were thin. The lead ran out in November, 6 weeks after the case opened. The hospital visitor logs from October were the second thread. Alderman requested them informally in the second week of the investigation, but was told by the hospital's administration that the logs for the relevant period had been moved to a storage system undergoing transition and would take time to locate. He made a note to follow up. The logs were never formally subpoenaed. His supervisor, citing budget constraints on a case that had returned no named suspect after 60 days, redirected Alderman's team to 3 other active cases before the new year. The decision not to subpoena the hospital visitor logs would be the institutional failure that a young woman named Detective Sergeant Priya Okafor of the Oregon State Police Cold Case Unit would read about in 2022, and mark in the margin of the case file with a single word: why. 2 men received attention in those early months. A transient who had been seen in the hospital area in early October was located in Lane County and interviewed twice. He was eliminated by alibi and the absence of any physical evidence connecting him to the scene. A former boyfriend of Nora's, a man from Dallas who had occasionally made unwelcome contact after their relationship ended in 1991, was interviewed and cleared. His whereabouts on the night of October 17th were confirmed by 3 independent witnesses. Elaine Sell drove to the Yamhill County Sheriff's Office for the first time in November of 1995, 3 weeks after her daughter's funeral. She was 57 years old, and she brought a pan of cinnamon rolls and set them on the front desk without explanation and asked to speak to whoever was leading Nora's investigation. Alderman came out. He sat with her for 90 minutes. She asked him every question she had. He answered every one honestly, which meant that most of his answers contained the word unknown. She told him she would be back. She was back in December. She was back in January. She was back every 2 months after that, for years, and then every 6 months, and she never stopped bringing something: rolls, a coffee cake, a tin of cookies, because she had been raised to believe that you did not ask anything of people without also giving them something, and what she was asking required more than she had words for. By 2001, 6 years had passed. Roy Alderman had moved to a supervisory role, and the Sell case had been assigned and reassigned twice within the department. The case file had grown to 4 volumes, but the active investigation had effectively stalled by 1999 when the last remaining lead, a second review of the pager's callback number through a new federal database, returned nothing. Marcus Sell was 12 years old. He lived with Elaine in Dallas, where he had moved after a year of school in McMinnville proved too difficult. He was a quiet boy who had become a quiet adolescent, and who kept his mother's photograph on his desk, and who had, by the time he was in middle school, developed the habit of reading the case file updates that his grandmother received from the sheriff's office and filing them in a folder he kept in his closet. By 2008, 13 years after Nora's death, the shoebox of rocks from Marcus's childhood was still under his childhood bed at Elaine's house, because neither of them had moved it. He was 19 and studying at Oregon State. Elaine was 70 years old. She still made her trips to the Yamhill County Sheriff's Office twice a year. The detective she spoke to had changed 4 times. By 2015, 20 years had passed. Roy Alderman had retired. He kept a copy of the case summary in his desk at home and reviewed it once a year on October 17th, the anniversary of Nora's disappearance, not because he expected to find anything new, but because he believed that attention was itself a form of respect, and this case had not received enough of it when it mattered. Dennis Warfield was 60 years old in 2015. He had lived in McMinnville since 1992. He ran a small contracting business, finished carpentry, light renovation work, and had served on the McMinnville City Council from 2003 to 2011. He coached Little League for 7 years. His wife of 20 years volunteered at the library on Thursday afternoons. He was known in his neighborhood as a man who remembered to wave from his driveway and who always showed up when someone needed help moving furniture. His name appeared nowhere in the Sell case file. Then, in the spring of 2023, a road crew working a drainage improvement project on Route 18, 3 miles east of downtown McMinnville, cleared a storm drain that had been partially blocked since at least 2010, according to county maintenance records. The crew foreman, a man named Gary Olson, was working the drain by hand when his fingers found something at the bottom of the accumulated sediment, a small metal object, roughly oval, on a chain so corroded it came apart when he lifted it. It was a locket, rusted brown, sealed shut the way old lockets seal, with the hinge corroded in the closed position. Olson turned it over in his hand. There was an engraving on the back, worn but still legible, Ness 21. He set it aside. At the end of the workday, he brought it to the Yamhill County Sheriff's Office. This channel runs because people like you believe these stories deserve to be told properly. If you want this work to continue, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Drop us a comment letting us know where in the world you're watching from. Every one of those comments matters. Now let's get back to Nora. The deputy at the desk who logged the locket was a young woman 2 years out of the police academy who recognized the initials, Ness, because she had, as it happened, read a training module on the cell case the previous year as part of a cold case review exercise. She called her supervisor. Her supervisor called the Yamhill County Cold Case Coordinator, who called the Oregon State Police. Detective Sergeant Priya Okafor drove down from Portland the following morning. She was 39 years old, had been with the OSP Cold Case Unit since 2018, and had been assigned the cell case as part of a 2022 review initiative covering 31 unsolved Oregon homicides from the 1990s. She had read the cell file 3 times. She had called Elaine's cell twice to introduce herself and confirm that the family wanted the case continued. She had marked the margin of the file in 2 places, why at the hospital visitor log section, and checked contractor records at the notation about the hospital renovation that had been completed in early 1995. The locket was opened carefully at the OSP lab in Portland. The conservator who handled it noted that the corrosion of the hinge had effectively sealed the locket in the closed position for most of its time in the drain. Water had entered but not flooded the interior completely. And the photo inside, a small printed photograph slightly larger than a postage stamp, had survived with significant water damage to its lower third, but with the upper portion, a face, a man's face, still clearly visible. The technology that would crack this case open is called facial recognition software cross-referenced against state DMV records, a process that compares the geometry of a face in a photograph against the database of driver's license photos taken across a given state, searching for a structural match in the proportions of the eyes, nose, and jaw regardless of aging or image quality. Oregon had integrated this capability into its law enforcement systems in 2019. It had never been tested on a photograph this old or this degraded. Okafor submitted the photograph on a Thursday afternoon. The result came back Friday morning. She was at her desk in Portland eating a breakfast sandwich when the notification appeared on her screen. She put the sandwich down. She read the name. She opened the cell case file to the section on the hospital renovation contract from early 1995 and ran her finger down the contractor log until she found the company name. The company was Warfield Finish Carpentry. The owner of record in 1995 was Dennis Aaron Warfield. She called the lab. She called her supervisor. Then, she pulled up the Oregon voter registration database and confirmed that Dennis Aaron Warfield was still a registered voter in McMinnville, Oregon, still living in the same county, still there. She sat for a moment. Through the window of the Portland office, the Willamette River was gray under an overcast November sky, And she thought about a woman who had walked out of a hospital exit at 11:42 on a Tuesday night and had been thinking, in all likelihood, about the names on the list in her breast pocket. Then she went to work. The investigation that followed was careful and complete. Okafor and the Yamhill County Sheriff's Office coordinated a parallel review of every piece of preserved evidence from the original 1995 case. The pager, still in its evidence bag after 28 years, was re-examined. The callback number it displayed was cross-referenced against records obtained by subpoena from a telecommunications archive, records that in 1995 had not existed in digital form and had been unavailable to Alderman's team. The number traced to a prepaid account. The account had been established by a person who, when investigators located the physical sales receipt in the archived records of the closed Salem shop, had provided a name and an address. The name was false. But the address, a street in a neighborhood of McMinnville, where Dennis Warfield had rented a room before he married in 2000, was not. The hospital visitor log that had never been subpoenaed in 1995 still existed, in partial form, in the hospital's archived records. The relevant month's log showed 2 visits in October of 1995, prior to Nora's disappearance, by a person listed as a contractor representative following up on the spring renovation work. No last name. A first name only. Dennis, the visiting department. Oncology and palliative care. The net closed from 3 directions at once. DNA evidence was obtained through a legal mechanism that allowed for collection without Warfield's knowledge. The profile was matched against biological evidence preserved from the 1995 scene. Evidence that the Oregon State Police Crime Lab had maintained in cold storage for 28 years, with a chain of custody that Okafor had verified during her 2022 review. The match was confirmed on a Wednesday, in January of 2024. On February 6th, 2024, Dennis Warfield was arrested at his home in McMinnville at 6:45 in the morning. 2 OSP detectives and 3 Yamhill County deputies were at his door. His wife was home. A neighbor who was leaving for an early shift at a bakery watched from across the street, her keys in her hand, and later told a reporter that she had simply stood on her front step and not moved, because she could not connect what she was seeing, the patrol cars, the uniformed officers, Dennis Warfield in his robe, to the man she had known for 17 years, the man whose wife she had driven to the emergency room once when Dennis was traveling, the man who had fixed her porch railing without charging her because she was a neighbor, and neighbors helped each other. Warfield did not speak when the handcuffs were applied. He looked at the officers. He looked at the patrol cars. He did not look at his wife. He was charged with first-degree murder. In pre-trial proceedings, his defense challenged the facial recognition evidence, arguing that the photograph was too degraded for reliable identification. The challenge was denied. The court accepted expert testimony that the match was supported by 3 independent evidentiary threads, of which the photograph was only one. In September of 2024, Dennis Warfield pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. At sentencing, he made no statement. His attorney read a brief expression of remorse on his behalf. The courtroom was quiet for a long moment after it was read. Marcus Sell was 35 years old. He sat in the front row with his grandmother's hand in both of his. Elaine Sell was 86 years old. She had driven to the Yamhill County Sheriff's Office for the last time in the spring of 2023, when Okafor had called her to say that something had come in and that the case was moving. She had not brought anything that time. She had simply sat down and listened, and for the first time in 28 years, she had not had to ask whether anyone was still looking. Nora's cell kept a handwritten list of her patients in her breast pocket because she wanted to think about each of them by name on the drive home. She had spent 5 years caring for people at the hardest passage of their lives, and she had understood, in the specific way of people who do that work, that the opposite of being forgotten is being named. She had a son who kept rocks in a shoebox and called her at 3:15 every afternoon. She had a mother who brought cinnamon rolls to the sheriff's office for 28 years. She had a locket with her initials on the back, given to her on her 21st birthday, and inside it was a photograph she had put there because she had believed it was worth keeping as evidence of something dangerous. She was right. It took 28 years. But she was right. Elaine's cell spoke briefly to reporters outside the courthouse after the sentencing. She said that she had never stopped going to that office because she had made a promise to herself in the parking lot of Willamette Valley Medical Center in October of 1995, standing beside her daughter's car, that she would not let Nora become a name that was simply filed away. She said the cinnamon rolls were her mother's recipe and that she had made them every time because Nora would have brought something too. Marcus Sell did not speak to press. He drove his grandmother back to Dallas that afternoon. On the way, they stopped at a diner outside McMinnville that Nora had liked, and they ordered the same thing she always ordered, and they sat for a long time after the plates were cleared. The Sell case contributed to Oregon's 2024 expansion of facial recognition protocols for cold case applications and the formal adoption of a statewide policy requiring hospital visitor log preservation for a minimum of 10 years. A gap in records policy that had allowed Dennis Warfield's name to remain absent from the investigation for nearly 3 decades. The policy change took Nora's name as its informal designation within the OSP cold case unit. Roy Alderman, 80 years old and retired in Newburgh, read about the arrest in the Oregonian the morning after it happened. He had kept his October 17th ritual for 28 years. He did not read the file that year. He sat on his porch with his coffee and looked at the hills and thought about a woman whose name he had learned on a morning in October of 1995 and never been able to set down. There is evidence that survives everything. Sometimes it survives because someone sealed it and put it somewhere dark, and it waited, patient and irrefutable, for someone to find it. Sometimes the only reason it survives at all is that the object it was hidden inside was given in love and made to last. A locket given by a mother to a daughter on her 21st birthday, held for 28 years in a storm drain so that justice could come. What does that say to you about the things we carry and what they carry back for us? Was the sentence Dennis Warfield received at 70 years old, with the life he built now fully visible to everyone who knew him, justice in the truest sense, or something that falls short because of how long it took? And for those following the expanding use of facial recognition in cold cases, does the technology's power here reassure you, or does it raise questions you also want answered? Leave your thoughts below. We read every one. Justice found Nora's cell after 28 years. Stories like hers are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description, and every one of them deserves to be known. Thank you for watching.